Thank you.
My interviews are called Conversations with History. And my God, this is a conversation with history that we're about to have. So let's put some background information on the table. You are 91, going on 40?
I'm 91. I was born 1912. At the year the Titanic went down, I came up. And then I was just wondering about the Titanic, rather interesting connotations there. You know, it was touching the tip of the iceberg. And so in a sense, it's rather interesting, 91 years old. By the way, I have a difficult time hearing, and I may miss some of Harry's comments and misunderstand them and try to answer them as I think they are. Sometimes having a speech, having a hearing impairment is very good. It gets you closer to the truth. For example, during the first few days of Bush's triumph in Iraq, we heard the phrase embedded journalists continuously. But to my ear, it comes out in bed with journalists. And so you see, hearing impairment does away with euphemisms. We come closer to a higher truth. Another case in point, Justice Scalia, the man who, after all, the most powerful man in America, the man who appointed our president, Justice Scalia, who, by the way, taught at my alma mater once, University of Chicago Law School. More about that in a minute. But Justice Scalia's name comes out to my ear, Scarpia. For those of you, the opera Tosca, you know Tosca, the opera. And Tosca's a diva, and Scarpia is the police chief before whom all Rome trembled, the sort of J. Edgar Hoover of Rome at the time. And so it's not Scalia, it's Scarpia. And so you see, it works. The other confession is John Ashcroft, our Attorney General, and I are fellow alumni. We both attended the University of Chicago Law School. I did about 30 years before he did, but I figured it out. He is considerably older. John Ashcroft, I figured out, is 350 years old. Let me explain to you why. You saw him. You saw an early incarnation of John Ashcroft when you saw Arthur Miller's play The Crucible. Now, you all know The Crucible. It's late 1690-something, Salem, Massachusetts. The fear of the terrorists of the day, witchcraft, the witches. And so here comes this reverend, and that's John Ashcroft's previous incarnation. Reverend Paris, his name is. And he says to the young hysterical kids, you're with me or you're against me, and if you deny my God, you are consorting with the devil. So they hanged a few old ladies. And so I figured out his age. He's 350 years old. And so, in a sense, you have now my hearing impairment and my confession. And now we begin. Now
You ready for the next question?
Yes.
I think with that soliloquy, people have a sense of your extraordinary mind. Now, as I went through and prepared for this, it struck me that there are two influences that really were your education. One was your mother's hotel and listening to all those voices there. Tell us a little about that. How did that affect you?
You see, I was more than the University of Chicago Law School, let me tell you that. The hotel was a men's hotel during the Great American Depression, but this is before the Depression. Now, the hotel was not a flop house. It was skilled guys, retired firemen, boomer firemen. Many of them were wobblies, IWW, who believed in one big union. Other guys were pro-boss. And so they'd have arguments back and forth. They called the wobblies IWW, meaning I won't work. That was the thing. Whereas the other guys called these guys who said the boss is there because he earned it. Remember John Houseman's commercial that he said he earned it because they earned it. And so the wobblies, as the IWW were known, called these guys scissor bills or capitalists with holes in their pocket. And so I used to hear these arguments. The thing we miss today is argument. We miss debate. We miss the whole idea of people going back and forth. And I loved hearing those arguments. Many were autodidacts. They were self-taught. They carried little blue books. They were called E. Hold'em and Julius Blue Books. They cost a nickel and a dime, printed in Girard, Kansas. And it'd be works of Shakespeare, it'd be the works of Clarence Darrow defending people. It'd be Plato, Aristotle, it'd be Bob Ingersoll, the agnostic. Oh, by the way, I happen to be, even though I wrote this book, Will the Circle Be Unbroken, I happen to be an agnostic. An agnostic, you know, is a cowardly atheist.
I see.
And at the same time, I do not deny people's right. I envy them, those who believe in a hereafter. I can't make book on it. Nobody can be a bookmaker in that respect, right? So if they get solace out of it, see, my point is that if someone is given solace out of a certain belief, that's enough. But the big thing is that wasn't a book about death at all. It was a book about life. How we live our lives today determines the nature of our death. We don't know a thing as to what happens later. We do what we do now. And so in a sense, it was about life. This all came up out of the hotel. You might even want to ask me one more. I know that Harry is about to ask me one more question, but I got to finish this.
That's right.
Now, maybe I'm jumping the gun.
No, please, go ahead.
How I find people.
Yes.
How I find people. Well, I love jazz. It's not, and many of the people I know about, I read an item in the papers about a former Grand Cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan, I can tell you that story later, who is a transformed man, who works now, he did work as an organizer for a black union, the same guy as the Ku Klux Klanman, for a little item I found. But here's a case in point. For the book Working, I try everything, a housewife, a teacher. What do you think about to a spot welder in an auto plant all day doing the same work? So in this case, it was a gas meter reader. You know what a gas meter reader is, don't you? The guy who comes into your basement with a flashlight. You know, you've had that, haven't you? Yeah. He visits you, a gas meter reader. So I asked him, tell me about your day. What goes on in your mind? He says, two things, dogs and women. And as he's talking, I realize the first is the reality, the second, the fantasy. Mm-hmm. So I say, okay, let's talk about the dogs first. What about the dogs? Says the worst are those poodles and the Pekingese pups. They're horrible, they're spoiled, they gnaw at my pants, they tear at my pants, and I use my flashlight as a weapon of defense. I want to hit them. And then as the lady of the house is going down the stairs, as he does, I follow her, and there's a little dog, and I just give him a whack to make up for the one I missed at the other house. But I say, okay, let's talk about the women now. He says, oh, well, nothing has happened, you understand. Nothing's happened. However, in my mind, like you go to a house, and he names a nice suburb on the north side of Chicago. And the lady of the house is very pretty, and it's sunshine, it's summertime, and she's on the patio taking a sun bath. That is, she's lying on the blanket with her chest down. She's lying with her back up, her chest down. She's in a bikini, and the bra is unbuttoned so that the sun can shine on her back in full. What I do is I creep up very, very softly, and when I'm right next to her, I holler, "Gas man!" And she turns around. Yeah. And then he says, you know, I get bawled out an awful lot. But it makes the day go faster. And that is what goes on in the minds of many people. How do you make the day go faster? And so that's part of it.
Which brings me to my next question, Studs. I think that it was mentioned that you did soap operas and you were on the stage, and I think the audience has a sense now that you're really a performer. So the surprising thing in your life story is that a performer, a man of the stage, became such a good listener. How did that happen? Well, because your books are about listening.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was always cast because of a gravelly voice. I was always cast as a gangster, a Chicago gangster. in case you don't remember radio soap operas, Chicago had more than New York and Hollywood put together, radio soap operas. Now, all the soap operas were the same. Guiding Light was about a minister, Woman in White was about a nurse, but they all had the same characters, the same, all you do is shift them around. And they always had three gangsters, the villains, they were the same plot. The bright gangster, middle gangster, dumb gangster. I was the dumb gangster. The one who said, get in there, you guys. And so I became that, and then became a disc jockey, but I became a rather eclectic disc jockey. I'd play operas, I'd play jazz, Louis Armstrong's West End Blues. I might play an aria from Fidelio with Lotta Lehman singing Lenore, and follow Woody Guthrie doing the Dust Bowl ballads. So, and that's when I first discovered Mahalia Jackson. I heard this voice. It was Apollo record. It was called Move On Up a Little Higher, a gospel song written for her by Professor Thomas A. Dorsey, the great songwriter who wrote Precious Lord, Take My Hand, Martin Luther King's favorite song. And I said, this is a voice I've never heard, but so I'd play her a lot. And she used to give me credit as being the white disc jockey who enlightened white world to Mahalia. She would have been known anyway. But that's how it came about. And the Mahalia story is interesting. You know, a while back, a friend from Mother Jones was saying how, well, this is autobiographical, isn't it?
Yes.
This is my life. All right.
We're going to bring out Ralph Edwards in a minute.
It was in the days when TV was brand new. Television, 1949, 1950. There was a new medium called television. It's on 6 to 10 at night. It didn't have the commercial or political possibilities that. So it was in the hands of the writers, the actors. Chicago had 3 programs that the whole country looked to. One was called Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, a wonderful puppeteer named Bert Truth made these little rags in his hand come to life. Another was Dave Garroway's show. Dave Garroway went to New York and was the first face ever seen on daytime TV. The Today Show. There wasn't any. The third program is one I was involved with, Studs Place. All 3 had a Chicago quality, all improvised. And so I'm pretty hot stuff at the time, called Hot Property. That's when what our friend talked about, when they came from New York and said, look, you signed all these petitions, it's McCarthy days. You're a hot property. Now, what are we going to do about it? Did you sign these petitions? Anti-poll tax, anti-lynching, anti-Jim Crow. And I said, yeah. I said, in fact, I never met a petition I didn't like. And that's when he said, you know, communists are behind these things. Well, it happens, I read something by Archibald MacLeish in Harper's Magazine, spoken about U.S. and the Soviet Union, how both are enthralled to one another. Both are nutty as fruitcakes. He was saying one does the opposite the other does. And that's when I got the idea. Well, suppose communists come out against cancer. Must we come out for cancer? And so the guy says, that is not very funny. And then he says, you got to stand up and be counted. So I stood up, you know. He says, sit down. That's not very funny either. and finally, he said, look, there's a way out. All you can say is you were dumb, you were stupid, you were duped, you didn't mean it. I said, but I wasn't, I did mean it. Well, and so I got canned, I got blacklisted. And so to this day, people say, as tonight, oh, Studs was heroic. I wasn't, I was scared crapless, you know, except that my ego was at stake. It wasn't dumb, it was my ego. And that's what did it. Or self-esteem, some might call it. So that's how it came. Now comes the Mahalia story. So I'm out. I'm blacklisted, but I live in Chicago. My kind of town, Chicago is, and people know me there. And so I make a buck or two at women's clubs, speaking about jazz and folk music. And there was a Legionnaire in town who would always follow me around and warn the women, and they all ignored him. One woman, very old and very elegant, was furious with him. She says, I was getting $100 a lecture, and she said, I will make it 200 as a result of that. She was so furious. So this man's name was Ed Clamage, who has since gone to the Great Legion Post across the sky. So Ed Clamage I wrote him a note, and I sent him a check for $10. I says, do you realize that you've made me an extra $100, and you're my agent, so here's a $10 check. And you know what? He never acknowledged my check. So that's how it began. So Mahalia is now internationally known, and they're going to, CBS, now it's CBS. The first experience was NBC. And CBS says, Mahalia, we're going to give you a national radio program. She says, yes, and Studs Terkel is going to be the host, she said. And they said, oh, no. She says, oh, yes. So I'm the host. So the show it has an audience that comes to see it, as you did, about 7 o'clock at night. And we're doing a dress rehearsal. This is about the third week of the show. When another guy comes in from New York, and he hands me a leaflet, a piece of paper to sign. He says, this is just pro forma. It's a loyalty oath. Have you ever been? I says, well, I'm not going to say, I don't believe in this stuff. When our voices are raised. And Mahalia's going to the piano to rehearse a new song we thought of as the theme. What was it? I forget the song now. Yeah, his eye is on the sparrow. And so we're going to do the song, and she hears this back and forth argument. And she always said to me, Studs, you've got such a big mouth, you should have been a preacher. You know, Mahalia said. So finally, she says, is that what I think it is, baby? I says, yeah. She says, you going to sign it? I says, no. Okay, let's rehearse. And he says, but Miss Jackson, he's very polite, Miss Terkel has to sign it because headquarters said he must. That's what Mahalia said. If they fire Studs, you tell them to find another Mahalia. And you know what happened? Nothing. He disappeared. He vanished. The moral is, she said no. She said no to the official word. And she had more Americanism in her, and more guts than General Sarnoff, Bill Paley, and all of them put together. And that's what the moral's all about. Saying no to the official word, if you know it's a cockeyed word. And now is the time. So that's more or less the story. So, this is a confession.
And in fact, I'll
Yeah.
read Studs to Studs, because in your biography, this is what you say.
Thank you.
As I look back at the McCarthy period, my obstinacy was not due to any moral stance. No, that had nothing to do with it. It was something else. Call it hubris, if you wish, though I pretend to modesty, I have an enlarged ego. I was being asked to play the fool, you say. Dupe was the word used. True, I often played the fool, but on my own terms. If I am to be the clown, I'd rather play it to King Lear than to Karl Munt. It's a matter of aesthetics as much as ethics. Don't you think so?
Why did you read that?
That is from your biography.
My God, I forgot.
My,
That's what happened, you know.
my job here is to feed you some of your biography.
Yeah, well, I
since the
forgot.
questions
Thank
aren't
you.
going too well. Yeah. But, okay, so we've established that Studs is a performer. He's doing soap opera. He's producing radio. Mahalia Jackson gives him a break. But I still want to understand how you became a listener. And I want to throw some more of your biography at you. You say in your biography that you were performing in a play of Sinclair Lewis's called It Can't Happen Here. And you really like that part. And you're talking about the part. I think that this is very important because it's an entry point into your role as an interviewer. We have you on the stage, but we've got to get you with that recorder talking to all of these people. And this is what you write. I remember that one exhilarating instant. Studs is playing a fascist in this play, a working class guy who becomes joins a proto-Nazi group. I remember that one exhilarating instant during the day's rehearsal when my corps uniform fits so snugly, so naturally, it became me. I no longer slouched. I was ramrod straight, my hands on my hips in the manner of General MacArthur, glowering past the last row of the theater in the Wardman Park Hotel. I looked beyond. Chad, that's the part he was playing, was miraculously somebody. Why is that
Oh,
important,
boy.
Studs?
See, you hit something Now, do all of you remember not Upton Sinclair, Sinclair Lewis's novel, It Can't Happen Here. It was a novel during the 30s when a lot of fascist groups, Father Coughlin was speaking Sunday night, Silver Shirts, Brinkley. There were a lot of various American native fascist groups. That is, they proclaimed themselves fascists. And Upton Sinclair's book is a fantasy of fascism called the Corpos, C-O-R-P-O. Obviously, take off on corporate stuff. They took over the country, and I'm this handyman who hates my boss. He's a liberal New England publisher, kindly liberal guy. I hate his guts because he doesn't recognize me, this guy. I'm sort of a George Wallace figure, but definitely someone who could easily become a stormtrooper. And so I finally do become that when the corpos win. So I become the Gauleiter of this town. And I'm describing the feeling of these nobodies. And I've come across these nobodies who are just ordinary people, but they feel frustrated by something and they take it out on the wrong person. And I remember putting that uniform on, the corpo uniform, and you were describing that. That was in the book. And I'm addressing this audience. This is the Washington Civic Theater. I was a member of that group. Wardman Park Hotel was the theater. And I never forget the feeling of power, the power that I, a nobody, felt as a somebody. And so that's what Sinclair Lewis had in mind. So you bring that up because we have this today. You have many who are furious and angry, and I've had several books, some neo-Nazis, who changed because they feel outside. And sometimes liberals are good, sweet people who ignore them completely as being illiterate, as being chauvinistic and jingle. They're not. They want to be part of something, and they're frustrated. They take it out on the wrong people, of course. So that's why that was an indelible experience for me, because it's timely now, too.
And a theme that runs through your work is that that in general in our society we don't listen to people, and that by listening you bestow upon them a kind of respect, a kind of dignity.
You're hitting a very big thing. You're hitting the important thing. Listening to people. Now, who am I as I talk to this woman? Now, I got to warn you. People think this is deliberate. I'm very inept mechanically. I'm not a Luddite, but I'm just learning to use a typewriter. I really am. It's an electric typewriter. It's very exciting. I hunt and peck. But the fact is, I use a tape recorder, and sometimes I press the wrong button. I can't drive a car. I fall off bicycles, and so I press the wrong button sometimes. And so the person seeing it says, "Look, he is not somebody from Mount Olympus. I mean, he's not from 60 Minutes, and he's not Baba Wawa Wawa. No, he's just a guy." And the person says, "It's not moving," when I had reel to reel. I forgot about it. Well, so I've lost Martha Graham, I've lost Michael Redgrave, and I almost lost Bertrand Russell. This was in North Wales during the Cuban Missile Crisis. If I did, I'd have put my head in the oven, But I finally caught it. So that defect that I have, like my not hearing, getting the truth, so my ineptitude sometimes works in my favor because that person feels I need him. So, but listening, of course, so this is one story I must tell. This is very early days. I think it was Division Street, America, 1965. That's how many years ago was that? My arithmetic, 38 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the tape recorder is still not as ubiquitous as it is today. And it's a housing project, and it's mixed. And I can't remember if she was white or she was black. She was light-skinned. She was very pretty, but she was skinny and had bad teeth because no dentists, 3 little kids are running around, 5, 6, 7 years old. They want to hear their mama's voice. So she's talked into my tape recorder. So I say to the kids, now you quiet down, and I'm going to play back. So she hears her voice for the first time in her life. And she hears her voice, and something she said, she puts her hand to her mouth, says, "Oh my God." And I said, "What is it?" She said, "I never knew I felt that way before." Hearing herself. And that's, to me, that's bingo. Bingo for her. Suddenly she realizes she thinks certain things she never thought of. Well, that's, and for me, of course, as a fellow journeyman with her, it's pretty exciting. That's the kind of stuff that I think I find very rewarding.
Studs, I wanted to say that I was afraid that you wouldn't feel at home with a Berkeley audience, so that I should have some props here. And I knew that we might wind up talking about your tape recorder, and I don't think you noticed here, but in his book, he's always talking about the ewer. And I read this, and what's a ewer? And then I did some investigating. So this is a ewer. With a tape deck, so it's your. I couldn't figure out whether it was your Charlie McCarthy, the tape recorder, or what. But you're abusive toward it. It's a tool. It's a way.
There's only one other person addicted to the tape recorder and me, and that was Richard Nixon.
I see. I see.
So I call Richard Nixon and myself. Fellow Cartesians. You know, Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." But Dick and I are neo-Cartesians. I tape, therefore I am.
Yeah.
I hope our purpose was somewhat different, you know. But nonetheless, I am as addicted to the tape recorder as Dick was.
And this reminds me, I'll share anecdotes with you, having read many of your books. But I noticed in one of your memoirs that somewhere that at the time of Watergate, you know, this very serious business, you convened a panel of burglars and safecrackers. 3.
Oh,
and so I'm reading this book, and it comes to Watergate, and these are second-story men. And Studs is asking them, "Well, what do you think of the way they did the job?" So I said to myself, "See, this is the difference."
I happen to know, as you probably gather, I know all variety of people
that's right.
living in Chicago.
That's right.
And 2 people I know are, how shall I put it? I call one Doc Graham and the other Kid Pharaoh. And they are, well, I know them, and they know me. They are soldiers of the mob. They want saloon keepers to be good, honest citizens. And so when, for example, the jukebox they feel is being underfed with nickels and dimes by them, they go there and they see to it that the person comes through and pays. You know, if he doesn't, well, there might be a finger slightly disjointed, you know, slightly. But so these 2 guys are authorities on housebreaking. And so I asked them, "What do you think about Watergate?" And they are furious. They are indignant. How dare they call themselves burglars? How they're such amateurs. In other words, we would do it, and these guys, Nixon and this, we would do it ourselves. We would do it, why, the simplest thing in the world. I come there, we'd come, we're all dressed people, S&W, our suits, S&W, Smith & Wesson. You know, we'd come dressed Smith & Wesson, and there was a dark-colored gentleman, the hero of it, you remember, was a young African-American watchman who was hardly mentioned. He was the hero. He was the one who found it. So we would surround him. We would see to it that he's handcuffed and then we'd walk out with our valises. And we walk out, most easiest thing in the world. And here these amateurs, all they had to do was go to Leavenworth. They could have gone to Alcatraz. They could have all the college boys. They call that college, you know. At all our colleges, with the easiest thing in the world. Instead, those amateurs doing damage to our reputation was horrible. So that was a 4th of July.
When I read that, I said, "Oh, if we were at Berkeley, then we would have convened an academic group to talk about Watergate, and we probably wouldn't have had as much insight into the actual event itself." Which leads me to make a point about you, Studs, is that you are a very smart theoretical person, but you have an amazing sense of humanity, of people, and what makes them tick. And I think that that's really what distinguishes you. And I want to talk, before we talk about your new book, I'm going to force you to talk a little about your art. Even I have to throw quotes at you. And you said of all your work, you're looking for the faces in the crowd to commemorate lives, the people who over a long haul of daily trials and small revelations found a sort of redemption and transcendence. It is in these faces in the crowd that have most attracted me during my searches.
Well, that's true. These are the faces in the crowd. They could go either way, you know, that thing. There were faces in the crowd that Hitler was addressing too. And there are faces in the crowd today who are looking for something. I'm convinced, by the way, in the innate intelligence and innate decency of the American people. And this is subject to the matter. Now, I'm also friends. Well, it's true. In all the books, you'll find that undercurrent. But I'm also friends with some of the conservative Tribune editors, Chicago Tribune. And I asked Bruce Dole, the page, he's an honest guy, and I says, tell me about the letters. I see a surprising number of anti-Bush letters in the Tribune, once owned by Colonel McCormick. He said, it's true. I says, which it raised? Well, most maybe, if anything, slightly anti, more than pro, but certainly 50-50 at best for that. That's an astonishing, see, letters to the editor, to me, are revealing things. In neighborhood papers and all, you find that. And more of this knowledge. I believe the people are way ahead of the politicians. I think, for example, I knew Dennis Kucinich's name is not known. We know that. He's got as much chance of winning the nomination as the Chicago Bears have the Super Bowl, you know. But of course he's the most qualified guy. So of course I'm for Dean, I know that. But I hope that Dean follows some of Kucinich's guts. That's the thing. So coming back to the subject again at hand, people, once they get the facts, it's getting the facts. Remember, our media, which is called, this is funny, our media is called liberal media, which is an obscene joke, of course. Our media is the most powerful mogul, is the Australian Neanderthal, Rupert Murdoch. And so this is the most astonishing thing. It's almost as though W.C. Fields wrote the scenario as we have it today. It's like it's written, because the humor, it's almost outrageous in its humor. But through it all, I sense in the people a tremendous feeling that something else is possible, something good. And I think once they were getting facts, and that's what the book is about. The book is about people, this book, Hope Dies Last, is really, I thought it was going to be a crazy book to do, because the others are more visceral. What is it like to live during a depression? What is it like during World War II? What's it like being a teacher? But this is hope. It came because of a woman in Fresno. Fresno is how far from San Francisco? Not too far, right? Well, it's Jessie de la Cruz, a retired farm worker, worked with Cesar Chavez. And we have a saying in Spanish, when things are bleak and confused, esperanza muera al último. Hope dies last. And I thought, that's it. And so it's a tribute to all the activists down through the years and those today. Activists are those who act, who do something. And they, to me, imbue the rest of us. They have hope. Otherwise, they wouldn't be activists. And they give hope to others. And that's what it's about, in a way.
When you talk to these people, how do you get the story out of them? I have a quote here. To Ivy Compton Burnett, you're talking about an interview with her, and you tell her, I'm constantly play acting. Here with you talking to the writer, I begin to talk like you. When I'm with a Chicago hoodlum, I like him. I'm a chameleon.
Yeah.
So is that, because it's quite impressive what you've done in all of these works.
I am a chameleon. That's true. You see, Ivy Compton Burnett is a very sophisticated Terkels writer, over now dead, who writes about masters and servants. That's her theme throughout. And she's very strong. At the end, crime pays. Crime pays. And so she's a little old lady. It came out of Victorian days as I wander into a place. And so I become like she is, sort of, you know. Mm-hmm. And she starts quizzing me. She's very curious. And all of a sudden, she's asking me. She's got me on the spot. Either way. And then as far as my becoming a chameleon, when I'm with Doc Graham and Kid Farrow, my two companions I told you about, I become like they are. And so this must be the world's Grand Hotel influence, I suppose. So it's the ham actor in me.
But it's also the Chicago influence, isn't it? I mean, Chicago is both such a provincial place and such a cosmopolitan place. It's so much of everything.
Chicago has always been a city of hands. You know, hands, that old-fashioned word for workers. City of hands. Remember, it's not the storied city like Lillian Hellman in The Little Foxes. Remember, it's Alabama, 1900. And remember, the central figure played by Tallulah Bankhead, Betty Davis in the movie, is this rough, tough sister who's going to make the money, going to make it big no matter what. She wants to be part of society. Where's she going to go when she gets it? Up north. New York? San Francisco? No, I'm going to Chicago. Because Chicago in 1900 had all sorts of, it was the city of Louis Sullivan and the skyscraper, the city of all sorts of predators as well. But at the same time, it was a city of writers. It was a seedbed of creativity, always has been.
I went to a bookstore today, Serendipity, and I found a little book called Chicago with pictures of the city with commentary from you. And one of I noted in the end that they lifted an intro that you had done for the Nelson Algren book. And in that, you're talking about Chicago as the North Star to Jane Addams as to Al Capone, to John Peter Altgeld as to Richard Daley, to Clarence Darrow as to Julius Hoffman. And talking about Algren, you say he saw it not so much as Janus face, but as the Carney Freak Show's two-headed boy, one noggin Neanderthal, the other noble-browed.
Well, it's Janus, the two-headed god, both are Chicago. More dramatically, I think, than any other city in the country, the two sides of Chicago. The one side of Jane Addams, the other side of Capone, let's say. And both are there, you see. John Peter Altgeld was the great governor who pardoned the poor Haymarket. Oh, one quick thing before we close. It's a story. We are suffering what I call a national Alzheimer's disease. See, that's why Bush and Ashcroft and all are able to get no memory of yesterday, as though there were no depression, as though the free marketeers, I call them marketeer to rhyme with buccaneer, you know. So the free marketeers during the great crash of 1929 fell on their knees and begged government, please help us out. And so the New Deal helped them out with regulations. And so it's their grandchildren, whose granddaddies begged the government, they say too much big government when it comes to health, education, and welfare, not Pentagon. So there's this loss of memory. I mean, there's this loss. The young have been deprived of this. Say many young kids are anti-union. So here I am, and this is the anecdote. I'm waiting I talk a lot, as you can gather.
Yeah.
And
right.
sometimes down the street I go talking to myself. And I find the audience very appreciative. And so they know me at the block. They know I wrote some books, but they also know me as the old gaffer talks to everybody. So I'm waiting for the bus. But this couple, I cannot reach. There's a couple. I have to call them yuppies because they are, you know. Most young are not. Most young are lost, bewildered, and wondering what. But these two are. He's in Brooks Brothers, and he's got the fresh minted Wall Street Journal under his arm, and she's a looker. She's got Bloomingdale, Neiman Marcus clothes, latest issue Vanity Fair. But I can't they won't recognize me. My ego is hurt, you know. Everybody knows me. We start talking. The bus this day is late in coming. So I said, I'm going to make conversation with him. So I say, Labor Day's coming up. That is the worst thing I could possibly have said. He looks at me. He gave me that look that no old coward would give to a speck of dirt on a cuff like that. And he turns away. Now I'm really hurt, you know. My ego is hurt. The bus is late in coming, so when I say something, I know it's going to get him mad. The imp of the perverse has me. And so I'm saying, Labor Day, we used to march down State Street, UAW-CIO. Which side are you on? Solidarity forever. He turns to me and he says, we despise unions. And I say, oh, I got a pigeon here. No bus. So I say, suddenly I fix it with my glittering eye like the ancient mariner. And I say, how many hours a day do you work? And he says, 8. He's caught. 8. How come you don't work 18 hours a day? Your great-grandparents. You know why? Because in Chicago, back in 1886, 4 guys got hanged fighting for the 8-hour day. It was a Haymarket affair. Fighting for you. And I got him pinned against the mailbox. He can't get away, you know. There's no bus. And he's a little trembling, and she's scared. She drops the Vanity Fair. I pick it up. I'm very gallant. I give it a Vanity Fair. No bus. And now I got him pinned. I said, how many hours a week do you work? He says, 40. How come you don't work 80 hours, 90 hours? Because your grandparents did. Because men and women got their heads busted fighting for you for the 40-hour week back in the 30s. By this time, the bus comes, they rush on. I never saw them again, but I'll bet you. See, they live in a condominium that faces the bus stop. And I'll bet you up on the 25th floor, she's looking out every day, and he says, is that old nut still down there? Now, I can't blame them, because how do they know? Who told them? What do they know about unions? So that's what I mean about a national Alzheimer's disease. It's that aspect. So all these books really deal with memory as well. What was it like during World War II? What was it like during the Depression? What's it like being black in a white-dominated, all white and black? What's it like growing old? What's the job of a teacher or welder like? So in a sense, it's memory as well. And that's what we're dealing with.
And it's really, if I can editorialize here, it's really memory that comes from the voices of the people that you interview. I have this feeling, this is my thesis for this interview, is that you just got tired of reading the traditional scripts, basically. And so you were a character in search of characters. And you took up this tape recorder, or one like it, and really went to listen to people, and people that most interviewers probably wouldn't talk to.
Well, that's true. You see, I have a way, I don't know what it is. Maybe it was being raised in that men's hotel. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was that rooming house before the hotel. I think I have sort of a transient, I see my background, my boyhood, childhood is that of a transient. And to have a transient quality. But before we close, and I hope there's some books to be signed, it's about this hope dies last. And I use the phrase prophetic minority. And you might think that's a Pollyanna phrase. And I dedicate the book, I have to explain this. I dedicate the book to a couple named Clifford and Virginia Durr. Now, you may not have heard of them. They're a white couple, lived in the South. Virginia Durr was a close friend of Jessica Mitford, who you may have heard of here. And she was the sister-in-law of Justice Hugo Black of the Supreme Court. And he was a member of the FCC. And they were very active in the civil rights movement, blacks of the South. And they could have lived a wholly different way. But they used to march down, and they were attacked. Only were 15, 20 of them marched down the streets of Montgomery, and they were attacked and egged and threatened. And then years pass, and I'm visiting now. It's 1965, 2 years after the March on Washington, the Selma Montgomery March of 1965. 200,000 people showed up there. that Selma Montgomery March. And we're in the house, Virginia Durr, I'm there with others. And some of there who were in the house were among those 15 people 20 years before. Miles Horton, who headed a certain school called Highlander Folk School that Rosa Parks attended. Rosa Parks worked as seamstress for Virginia Durr, and she told her about that school. So it's not accidental that Rosa Parks did what she did. She would have done it anyway, but nonetheless, that played a role. So at the end of the day, it's a remarkable day. 200,000 people end at the mansion, outside the mansion of Governor George Wallace, and we watch him on the radio, on the TV now. He's excoriating these dirty subversives, and he names people in the room. Miles Horton, E.D. Nixon, the former Pullman car porter, head whom Rosa Parks worked for, head of the NAACP of Montgomery. And he starts naming them, and suddenly Miles Horton says, "Isn't it funny? There we were, 15 people, we knew each other by name, and now there are 200,000. I don't know one, they don't know me. Isn't it wonderful?" That's the prophetic minority. They did it. Even the beginning of this country, half the country was Tory. Half the country wouldn't have minded the king, but there was Thomas Paine. There was Samuel Adams. They were activists. The abolitionists, they were activists. Then came the 60s. The black people, the students, activists. And so in a sense, they are prophetic. It may seem as though the odds are against them because they have that thing called hope. And because they have that thing called hope, others are imbued with it too. And that's why I honor them in this book.
Would you, I think we've given the audience a sense of this, this listening that has become your art. Would you like to read from the book now? I have Cathy Kelly, a piece from that, which will give them, I think, a flavor for the book, but for this miraculous art that you have for listening. Would you like to?
Well, okay, just briefly, because I'd like to do, I hope, some signing.
Yes.
By the way, I think you'll find this book, if I could say this, I'm a peddler now, I'm plugging the book. I think that you will find it, what you're looking for. This is Cathy Kelly, I'm glad you asked me this. Now, a marvelous Iranian woman just won the Nobel Peace Prize, Shirin Ebadi, is a wonderful woman. You know, was also a candidate, Cathy Kelly. And she knows this woman, by the way. Cathy is, well, I'll read this.
This is...
No, before that, I got to say who she was.
Yeah, please, yeah.
Cathy Kelly is a devout Catholic family. She's a disciple of Dorothy Day. You know who Dorothy Day was? The great Catholic worker. And it's Dorothy Day who, when asked why you do what you do, why do you get arrested protesting wars and stuff, she says, I'm working toward a world in which it would be easier for people to behave decently. And that's Cathy Kelly's thing. And so she bore witness in Basra and in Baghdad. She was there. She organized a group called Voices of the Wilderness, and this is the group. Here's the one what happened. She's talking about the silos, about the missile sites. You know, we're hundreds of them all over the country. You've seen them, you may have noticed them. They're little hillocks and the little white, and in it is stuff to destroy thousands, 100,000s of people. The thing had impact on me was going to a U.S. prison for a year for planting corn on a nuclear missile site. She wanted to plant corn there because that's where corn was. And so she speaks of the silos and she tells the whole thing. And so she called up the authorities because she wants publicity for this, what this does to ourselves. She had the sign, you know, beat your swords into plowshares, study war no more, Isaiah, the Old Testament prophet. And so here come the trucks, the military trucks. I can say it better than read it. Here come the military trucks and there's this 85-pound girl, woman, Cathy, sitting on the missile site. And so the commander says, the captain or the general says, well, the personnel of the missile site get off and kneel and we'll handcuff them, plural. It's she, 85 pounds. So she comes off and she's kneeling, and just then a little boy comes over, a soldier boy, about 19, 20, with his gun pointed at her head. And he's shaking. He's scared to death of Cathy Kelly, the enemy, the terrorist, Cathy Kelly. and so he's got the gun pointed at her head, and she's saying to him as she's kneeling, you know what I'm doing now? I'm praying for the corn to grow. Would you want the corn to grow? And he says, yes, ma'am. Well, will you pray with me for the corn to grow? And he says, yes, ma'am. And they're praying. She has a prayer about corn growing. And then it's very hot. And this kid with the gun aimed at her saying, ma'am, are you thirsty? She's, oh, God, yes. It was broiling hot. He puts his gun down, which I'm sure was against orders. He takes out his canteen. And he says, ma'am, will you lean your head back a little? And he's pouring the canteen, the water into her mouth, she says, as worms into a little bird's mouth. And that's the kid is in Iran today. That's the kid, the same kid. You saw the front page of the New York Times today. These two kids, I got a little 6-year-old kid is like this, and they're frisking the 6-year-old Iraqi kid, you know. But these are the kids, and suddenly you realize that's what America is, this kid. He's an ally. And so at the very end of this particular story, she says, Studs, I'm telling you this. I know I saw him in the courtroom when I went there, and she was sentenced to prison. But, the magistrate was very nice. He says, but I got to do it. You're not going to recant? No, she's not going to. And so she saw the kid, and she winked at the kid, and he was trembling. He was afraid, so she says, if he happens to read this book, please forgive me if I told it to Studs, but I had to tell that story. So I think that story of Cathy, at the end of the book, is what it's all about, the hope, reaching this kid. And that's what it's about, the goodness that is there.
Studs, on that note, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm ready. Thank you. That's about it, I think.
So we'll be waiting for the next book, but until that comes...
Oh, the next book. I thought this would be my last book. And remember, I was also saying that before this book, the other was my last book. But now I got another idea. So. But in the meantime, where do we sign? Thank you very much.
So we'll go ahead and make arrangements for you to come through in a year or two with the new book. But in the meantime, Studs will be out front. There will be books. Cody's has them on sale, and he will sign them.
I will go right now, but I want to offer one thing. I guess you want to know how I feel about death. I have an epitaph all set, and my epitaph is simply this: curiosity did not kill this cat.
Okay.
So we'll go sign Cody's.